Molly here. Before I get started on the recap and review of Star Trek Discovery Season 5, Episode 4, I would just like to thank everyone who stepped up and subscribed to our channel. It's been a long, I think 4 years that we have been working toward this, but we finally hit 1,000 subscribers. It feels great because now we will actually at least get a percentage of the advertising that was already running on our videos. So I appreciate everyone coming out and stepping up and helping us. I just want everyone to know that being monetized, it is not going to harm the content that we have been giving you all along. I just want to make sure to give that reassurance because I know I've seen some channels that seem like once they got monetized, they seem to go down a path that would get them the most views and make them the most money. We are not that kind of channel. Otherwise, it would not have taken us this long to get monetized in the first place because we stick to our values and what we believe, and we're going to keep doing that. So I just wanted to say thank you guys and just make sure to reassure everyone that we are definitely going to keep bringing you great content. In fact, hopefully this will help us to bring you more and better content than we had actually been bringing you before, just because hopefully we'll get a little bit of pocket money that will allow us to invest in things like software and maybe some better microphones and things like that. So again, thank you guys. I really, really appreciate it. I guess we should just jump right in. Star Trek Discovery Season 5, Episode 4, Face the Strange. The episode starts with a flashing images warning, which didn't sit well with me because I actually suffer from chronic migraines and flashing images are a trigger for me. So I was a bit concerned before watching the episode, but rest assured I made it through okay. I just feel that's irresponsible of them to do something like that in this day and age, but whatever. The episode actually starts with a 15 hours ago flashing on the screen, and what we see is Mal and Locke killing a guy, selling them what turns out to be a time bug, that spider-looking thing that is on Adira's sleeve. The only way we know that that's what that was is that this established an image that dissolved into Adira's sleeve, and then the little spot that Mal had put on her sleeve in the previous episode, it comes to life as a spider and walks off. Otherwise, there was no dialogue in this scene establishing that that's what that was. But anyway, Mal and Locke just kill this guy. Locke expresses that he has some cold feet about what they're about to do, but Mal is obviously the bloodthirsty, greedy one, and she just keeps on pushing for it. The next scene is on Discovery. As I said, the spider on Adira's jacket wakes up and walks away. On the bridge, Cmdr Rayner is trying to efficiently and expeditiously locate Mal and Locke. It's clear he's struggling with allowing Michael Burnham to run her ship as she sees fit, and he has little patience for the meandering communication style of the crew. He cuts off a theory by the tactical officer as far as what Mal and Locke are currently up to. Michael Burnham takes Rayner to her ready room for a chat, and by take, I mean they used their personal transporters to beam there directly from the bridge. He tells her that during the burn, they had to be decisive and disciplined, and Michael Burnham responds, "You don't think my crew is disciplined?" Rayner tells her that they're too familiar and comfortable with each other, and with her. Michael Burnham lectures Rayner about the value of connecting with the crew, and how their familiarity helped save the galaxy. Rayner realizes he has overstepped the chain of command and apologizes. Michael Burnham tells him the burn is over, and he's on her ship now, and she expects him to do things her way. He says, "And if my way is better?" And Michael Burnham just stares at him with a disgusted look on her face. The time bug spider has made its way to engineering. Stamets sees it and watches it crawl along the wall and then disappear on a panel. The lights on the ship fluctuate, and the bridge notifies Michael Burnham that they have detected an energy fluctuation and that something has broadcast an unauthorized signal from the ship. Michael Burnham and Rayner tap their badges and are unable to transport. While they were attempting their transport, the ship has jumped through time and is currently following Michael Burnham in her Red Angel suit to the future. The bridge crew is all unconscious on the floor, and as Tilly begins to wake, Michael Burnham rushes Cmdr Rayner out of the room saying, "They can't see us." The ship jumps through time again. Michael Burnham and Rayner are on the Discovery at the ship's construction, which took place on the ground and not in space. They encounter one of the workers building the ship, and he thinks Michael Burnham and Rayner are there for an early inspection. He tells them they are ready, but to go to Deck 7 last. Rayner tells him that's where they're going first, and says, "Fail to prepare, prepare to fail." He then tells Michael Burnham that he hates that saying. But, in my opinion, the saying is accurate, so I don't know why he said that. Except that clearly, the writers hate that saying, for whatever reason. Michael Burnham and Rayner figure out that they are jumping through time. Michael Burnham points out that everyone they're encountering is living in the moment, but she and Rayner are aware that they are jumping through time. This is because she and Rayner were beaming at the exact moment the time jumping began. They jump again. This time, they land in the Battle of Control. Michael Burnham and Rayner run through the possible causes for the jumping, and Rayner realizes it's a time bug left over from the temporal war. They could be stuck doing this for weeks or months. They realize Malin Locke must have somehow gotten it on the ship when they were on Trill, and the unauthorized broadcast has conveniently told Malin Locke the Discovery's location. Rayner says the bug should be in engineering, and Michael Burnham tells him that they need to find Stamets. Due to Stamets' tardigrade DNA, he exists outside of time. He'll be aware of the time jumping, like she and Rayner are. They jump again. This time, it's the middle of an attack, and there's a fight scene. Jet Reno comes out and saves Rayner, and they jump again. This time, they've jumped to the future. Zora tells Michael Burnham that everyone died about 30 years earlier after Malin Locke sold the progenitor's tech to the Breen. Zora opens the view screen, and we see Federation headquarters has been destroyed. Michael Burnham goes over to the captain's chair and tells Rayner how the first time she walked on the Discovery's bridge, she nearly ran back off because she respected Starfleet too much to believe she deserved to be there after what she'd done. Rayner tells her she must be the first person in Starfleet to captain a ship she first boarded as a prisoner. He then asks her how she did it, and Michael Burnham tells him she never gave up. That's when Michael Burnham figures out that tracking the time cycles isn't enough, and Zora tells them the other factor is speed. And Michael Burnham tells Rayner they're not just traveling through time, they're also traveling through space. Zora then shows them that the jumps are a conical wave. They jump again. This time we see Stamets talking to Jet Reno, and he's trying to figure out when they've landed. He runs a hypothetical time scenario by her, and she gives him valuable information to solve the problem. Michael Burnham shows up, and Stamets yells that there's a spore breach, and the crew needs to evacuate engineering or mushrooms will grow in their lungs. Stamets shows Michael Burnham and Cmdr Rayner the time bug, and it's embedded itself in the power distribution subsystem. Rayner reaches out to remove it, and Stamets grabs his wrist and tells him that if it's removed improperly, timelines will converge and it will rip them apart in infinite directions for eternity. All Rayner can say is, "Sounds bad." Stamets tells them they need to nullify the bug's effect in near-perfect precision. He needs the pattern of the time resets, which Michael Burnham got from Zora. He can now build the device needed to stop this. They jump again to when the holodeck in Michael Burnham's quarters has just been installed, and they need a component from it. Michael Burnham goes to her quarters, gets the thing she needs, and encounters Book. He tells her how great she is, and she has to tell him she loves him, and she kisses him. Stamets has built the necessary device, and Michael Burnham gives him the final component. Michael Burnham attempts to place the device on the bug, but it defends itself with a temporal shield. Michael Burnham tries to hit it with a wrench, and the wrench turns to dust after penetrating the shield. Time is greatly accelerated inside. They jump again. In the next scene, Michael Burnham has the device in her hands, so it must have traveled with her, because they are now in Lorca's time as captain, but he and Saru are away on a mission. Stamets tells Michael Burnham and Rayner that they can mitigate the effects of the bug's shield by taking the ship to max warp and breaking the warp bubble. At that point, whatever penetrated the shield would still age, but not instantly. Stamets then explains that changes they make to the current time don't become permanent until after the bug resets, so as long as they're successful, none of this will affect the timeline. Michael Burnham is going to have to convince the bridge crew to listen to her and take the ship to maximum warp. Rayner points out that at this time, Michael Burnham is a mutineer, and they won't listen to her, and Michael Burnham says she'll find a way. Stamets and Rayner head for engineering. Michael Burnham heads for the bridge. She runs into the sneezy turbolift alien, and he tells her that red is her color. He gets out of the turbolift, and that's when Lorca-time Michael Burnham is entering the lift and sees herself. Somehow, future Michael Burnham can't convince her past self that she is her, and they get into a physical fight, ending with future Michael Burnham neck pinching past Michael Burnham. The line delivery from past Michael Burnham was aggressive and did not match the Vulcan-conditioned behavior past Michael Burnham actually displayed back in Season 1, but we'll discuss that more in the review portion. Future Michael Burnham renders past Michael Burnham unconscious, and as she lowers her to the floor, she tells herself she knows it's hard to see a path to the captain's seat from where she is, and how even she forgot how hopeless this time felt. It will be a long road, but don't give up. She leaves her past self unconscious in the middle of the corridor instead of stashing her somewhere out of the way. In engineering, Stamets has trouble keeping 23rd and 32nd century tech straight in his head, and Rayner tells him he needs to hurry it up. That's when Stamets tells him to cool it with the gruff candor routine, and that Rayner has no idea how much pressure Stamets is under. Rayner says he thought working under pressure was Stamets' thing, and Stamets tells him things change, and sometimes there are some things that can't be figured out on your own, and that Rayner should try being the one to keep the ship together so they don't die and erase everything they've ever done from history. And even if they make it back, the progenitor tech is different and bigger than anything he's taken on before. Rayner tells Stamets he's not alone and asks what he can do to help. Stamets has Rayner transfer control of the plasma coolant system to another console. Rayner does it, and then Rayner tells Stamets, let's show them how a couple of old dogs still know the best tricks. Stamets smiles, and the sappy music plays. On the bridge, Michael Burnham has to convince the bridge crew that she's from the future and they need to do what she says. Lieutenant Commander Arium scans the ship for Michael Burnham's life signs and discovers that there are 2 of her on the ship. This is when Michael Burnham starts telling the bridge crew personal stories about themselves in order to convince them that it's her and she knows them. When she gets to Arium, she tells her when and how she dies, and how she got infected by an AI and sacrificed herself to save everyone else. The rest of the bridge crew gets nasty, even pulling a phaser on Michael Burnham, insisting that she shut up and that Arium would never give up like that and sacrifice herself, which I will come back to later in the review. Arium insists she would do that, and she believes Michael Burnham. They then prepare to go to maximum warp. Stamets and Rayner prepare to use the device on the time bug, with 3 minutes left in the cycle. That's when past Michael Burnham shows up and pulls a phaser on them. This is very reminiscent of a scene in Season 1, Episode 7, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. This time, instead of Stamets using his knowledge of Michael Burnham, Rayner has to use his knowledge of Michael Burnham to convince her to stand down. Rayner uses his knowledge of the crew to convince the tactical guy Michael Burnham brought with her that he knows him. He tells past Michael Burnham the information future Michael Burnham told him earlier in the episode about wanting to run from the Bridge of Discovery on her first day on the ship because she felt she didn't deserve to be there, which he says was a few weeks ago for her, and he's guessing she still feels that way. He tells her she does deserve to be there, and she's doing a damned good job with all the shit she's going through, and it will make her into one hell of a captain. For what it's worth, he lost his family young too. And when that happens, there's only one thing left you can trust, and that's the voice in your head. Hers is going to take her to some great places. Keep trusting it, especially now, because he knows it's telling her, crazy as it seems, do the right thing and stand down. Let us complete our mission. Of course, she stands down. They break the warp bubble. Rayner sticks the device on the time bug, his hand aging inside the shield. The time bug gets fried, and they return to the present, and the whole ordeal only took 6 hours, and the past wasn't altered. Rayner's hand is aged, like a banana on the Orville, and he tells Michael Burnham that it isn't lost on him how she pulled it off, that knowing the crew convinced them. She admits familiarity can lead to complacency, but they've somehow used their connection to keep them honest and make them better. She says she should have shown that to him, and he says she showed him more patience than he deserved, and he can be stubborn like she used to be. She says she still is, just in a different way, and seeing her old self was a really good reminder. We are always changing. She understands the way Rayner came to Discovery, and being on Discovery is a big adjustment. but they made a pretty good team. The bridge crew tells Michael Burnham they can't believe they believed her in the past. Rayner comes on the bridge and shows his hand is healed. In the missing 6 hours, Mal and Locke were there, but now they're gone, and they didn't leave a followable warp signature. Rayner apologizes to the tactical officer because his theory about Mal and Locke from the beginning of the episode proved to be correct. Now they have to solve the clue to catch up with Mal and Locke. The end. I'll just start out just by throwing 2 things out there. Number 1, this wasn't about familiarity. Michael Burnham and Captain Rayner used what they knew about the crew to manipulate them. So I'm not sure that that's really a good thing to be putting out there, but maybe that's just perspective. The other thing I will say is, when that bridge crew refused to believe that Ariam would sacrifice herself, shouldn't any of them be willing to do that, to sacrifice themselves for the rest of the crew? Or even just the good of humanity? I thought that was part of the deal with signing up for Starfleet. But hey, maybe that's just me.
I'm going to start off with the very few positives I have of this episode. The one positive that I have is at the beginning of the episode, when Michael Burnham and Rayner were talking in her ready room, and he was getting a bit lippy with her. He caught himself, and he admitted that he was in the wrong, and he apologized. Which anybody who has watched our compilation videos of clips we made this week, that was our last one with Tilly that we had such a problem with, because Tilly was being extremely insubordinate, and she thinks she's still in the right, because respect is a two-way street, except in Tilly's mind, two-way street means only Tilly and the crew earn respect.
Yeah, she had no room for respecting the chain of command, period. So that I don't even understand how they could do that, but whatever.
I don't know why Michael Burnham even assigned Tilly to this case, because it was a conflict of interest, because Tilly and Michael Burnham are best friends, and Tilly clearly cannot separate her friendship with her duties as lieutenant on Discovery right now. All she was basically like a snitch to tell Michael Burnham how Rayner's been screwing up.
Plus, wasn't she just on loan from Starfleet Academy? I mean, that's where her real position is right now.
That's what I think, too. They didn't really explain, that I'm remembering, why she's still on Discovery.
Again, I think it was just convenient writing to use the Tilly character and pair her up with the Rayner character. It didn't matter what position was supposed to be doing that. They wanted to set up that scenario.
And it was cringy. That last episode was cringy. Rayner was going down the same path with him being in the Tilly role. And I give credit, at least the writers realized that's wrong, although they probably realized it because it was Michael Burnham. Michael Burnham will not tolerate insubordination when it's against her, but I guess the crew can do it as long as Michael Burnham's not the target. So to give credit, Rayner did catch himself and apologized and said, I spoke beyond what I should have here. That was inappropriate of me, which is what Tilly should do to Rayner. But at this point, I don't care. This episode, to me, mostly ruined the Rayner character. So the praise I was giving him last week, about 70% of it is gone now. And the second thing I'm going to give as a positive is there was a window of I guess 20-ish minutes when the time jumping started happening. And once you just kind of accepted that this is how Discovery was going to tell the story, where I was actually not hating what was happening on the screen as they were trying to figure out what was going on. They, meaning Rayner and Michael Burnham.
Yeah, the change came when Michael Burnham walked up to that captain's chair in the future and started opining about how she felt she didn't deserve to be there when she first walked on the bridge. And that's when Captain Rayner started to effectively kiss her ass. And the ass kissing didn't stop for the rest of the episode.
That's the ending of anything positive I'm going to say about this episode. Because this episode wore the guise of this was a Rayner character development episode because he's a new character we just got introduced to. That is not what this episode was about. This episode was about showing how Michael Burnham is the bestest ever. And that any criticisms we have of her past, we weren't paying attention because they're going to set us straight on how great Michael Burnham was even back then. And I told Molly before this video, I've got a little bit of a lecture I want to give, but I'm going to put it toward the ending of this video. because there's going to be spoilers for other franchises, because I'm going to try to compare the things they were trying to do in this episode to other people who did it better and why it worked there and not here. But like I said, I'm going to say that for later because there's spoilers, and I want people to be able to skip that if they don't want spoilers for those franchises.
One thing I will say is that after we watched this, we went back and we rewatched, what was that, season 1, episode 7?
Magic to make the sanest man go mad.
Yes. The one where Harry Mudd comes on board the Discovery and blows it up over and over and over again. The time loop. And that was a really effective way to compare the portrayal of past Michael Burnham in this present episode of season 5 to what the behavior of this character actually was back in season 1. It was very obvious that there was a huge discrepancy because season 1 Michael Burnham, she still had that Vulcan thing going on, that all of that aloofness and reserve. And the Michael Burnham from the past portrayed in this season 5 episode, she was very aggressive. She was not measured in her speech. She was very quick to just start a fight with herself. I mean, it was not what they showed in that time loop episode from season 1.
And we're defending Michael Burnham from season 1 only because I believe that they portrayed this past version of Michael Burnham like this to show the illusion of growth of current Michael Burnham.
Well, yes, they're trying to go back and rewrite history is what this is, because a lot of the complaints have been that this character has not shown real character growth, that she never really truly took responsibility for what she did. And I stand by that, because going back and rewatching that season 1 episode, again, this was not the same character that they were putting up as a straw man in season 5 and saying, oh, this is what Michael Burnham used to be before she grew. And it's like, no. We can all go back and rewatch season 1 and see this isn't the case. So I don't know who they're trying to fool, but I'm sure they'll probably fool quite a few people. Part of me is shocked that they would even try to do this, try to rewrite history in this way to make the current character more tolerable. I guess that's what they were trying to do, but all it did was just make it worse, in my opinion. Because again, it's like, I see exactly what you're doing, and this actually makes me think even less of these writers and the showrunners than I did before.
I'm just going to call this out for what it is. This season, this series has been strip mining Deep Space Nine and TNG episodes and putting their own twist on a retelling of it. Molly and I were joking about this after we watched this episode. What we think is when they typed what they wanted into ChatGPT or whatever AI program they're using to get story ideas because this team has no creativity, they forgot to say, oh, and don't use previous Star Trek Discovery episodes. Because this episode was a strip mining of the season 1 episode, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. The chase was used for this whole progenitor thing, and Armageddon game was used to flesh out a little bit of the Rayner character from Deep Space Nine. They actually are strip mining their own stuff now. They're cannibalizing themselves. Because if you watch that episode, season 1, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, you're going to see that a lot of the plot elements are the same, including Stamets and being able to not be affected by the time looping in the first season episode or the time jumping in this episode. And there were other parallels that were going on.
Even the blocking in some of the scenes was the same. For instance, in the end of the episode when Michael Burnham is holding a phaser on Cmdr Rayner, that was nearly identical to a scene from that season 1 episode. The only thing is that it wasn't Ash standing next to her. And I can't believe I'm about to say this, but that season 1 episode, going back and watching it after watching this season 5 episode, it actually made that season 1 episode less crap than it was before. I thought it was so awful the last time, I'd actually stopped watching Discovery for a while after that episode. Obviously, I picked it back up again, but that episode was it pissed me off so much especially when they brought that space whale on, and I didn't even finish watching the episode the first time out.
Well, they messed up Harry Mudd's character, too.
That, too.
Harry Mudd was this likable con man.
Yeah.
But he never did physical violence.
Well, he certainly wasn't a repeat murderer. He killed those people over and over and over again. And I guess these people, the defenders, would probably argue, oh, well, they didn't stay dead. But still, isn't that torture? I mean, that's still sick and twisted shit. So, yeah, I mean, I hated what they did with that first season episode. As I said, it turned me off from watching Discovery for, I think it lasted like one episode before I went back and started watching again, because then I was like hate watching, I'll be honest. But going back and rewatching it now, it was actually less awful than this season 5 episode.
That doesn't mean it was good. It's just, compared to this season's episodes, it was so much better than what they did.
And that's because that season 1 episode felt less preachy in your face with their weird messaging than the stuff they're giving us now. In that season 1 episode, they kept talking about connections, and in that season 1 episode, it was a way to prove that they were who they were. That Stamets got information from Michael Burnham so that he could use it in a next loop to convince her that, yes, indeed, it's him and that he talked to her already. So, you know, the whole connections thing was there, but it wasn't in your face.
The season 1 episode, when Burnham was talking about connections, she was still in that Vulcan mode where she was behaving like a Vulcan because she was raised in a Vulcan society. So when she was talking like that, what she was trying to understand was how to form connections, period. She didn't have a background to do that, and so she had a conversation with Stamets about this sort of behavior. Whereas in this season, what they're trying to say here is connections. It is what makes your life, is if you have connections. It's what makes you a great leader if you have connections. And yeah, I agree with what Molly just said. They're preaching now that somehow forming connections is the end-all, be-all of life. That's what you have to do for life and to be a great leader. We watched this Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad season 1 episode. We weren't planning on doing that, but after we watched this episode of season 5, we looked at each other and said, didn't we see this story before?
And there were a few other parallels. For instance, instead of kissing Book in the season 1 episode, it was Ash that Michael Burnham had to kiss or wound up kissing, whatever. Yeah, so that was different. And obviously in the season 5 episode, it was Rayner in the role of Michael Burnham as far as being told how to form connections.
I'm not claiming that forming connections isn't a good thing for human beings to do. I have friends, I have family, I have those sorts of things, and I think it enriches who I am. But that should not be the primary thing you do in leadership. Sure, you want to get to know the people that are under you if you're talking bridge crew, but you're not going to have the ability to get to know every single crew person on a ship personally unless the crew is like 20, 30 people. I mean, think about when you were in high school. How many of those people in high school did you know? It probably depends on the size of your graduating class, but how many of those people did you really know? A dozen maybe? 2 dozen if you're lucky? I mean, I graduated from a high school where my graduating class was like 1,200 people. I knew a couple dozen people, and then acquaintance-wise, maybe like a dozen more, but that was it. I didn't know all 1,200 people. I didn't know details. I didn't even know their names. I'd have to open up my yearbook to look at everybody.
In this instance, like with Discovery, and I just want to say this because this seems to be something being pushed on a lot of people, say, like in the corporate sphere these days. Your coworkers are not your friends. They are your coworkers. When they leave that position, odds are you're not going to be friends anymore because you're not really friends. But this notion that your work family is a thing, it's utterly bizarre. Those people don't really know you. You don't want to know them, let's be honest. So where is all this weird crap coming from that, I don't know. I don't understand. Your coworkers aren't your friends.
What bothers me is we've been observing that these secret hideout Star Treks, we've been saying they seem to be aimed at like the emotional development of like a 15-year-old, a tween, 13 to 15, maybe going back to 12 to 15. This episode with that sort of messaging, this is like 8-year-old, 5-year-old stuff. I mean, I can't even say insulting because, like I said, the message isn't horrible, but like Molly mentioned in our last video, we've been watching Prodigy, and that is a children's show. It's self-described as a children's show. I would expect a theme like this in Prodigy, not in Star Trek Discovery. It was really, really weird.
And it was all done to try to make Michael Burnham look better and to try to bring Cmdr Rayner into the fold of their Discovery cult. He drank the Kool-Aid.
He drank the Kool-Aid, and so he's just lost his soul. Because that's what happened, by the way. Because during this episode, several times this type of concept was stated. And I don't think the writers know this, but when you state this outright, the absurdity of what this show is about becomes apparent. I'm going to paraphrase because the exact quotes aren't necessary. But the paraphrasing is something like, as a mutineer, who would have thought that you'd be captain one day? How ridiculous is that statement? I think very. And what this whole episode was, once we figured out the scam they were pulling on us, is all they were doing was trying to show they were, in their own way, taking criticism that people like our channel are doing about the Michael Burnham character. Then they were twisting the Michael Burnham character. So Michael Burnham has always felt like she didn't deserve to sit in that captain's chair, and she always felt guilty about what she did. Really? Because that's been a criticism of Molly and me for a long time. When did that happen? Because it happened in this episode. They rewrote history. It was funny because if anybody remembers the TNG episode, second season, Shades of Grey, where Riker gets that thorn in him, and so he's unconscious, and he's reliving like a clip show in his head of the greatest hits of the first two seasons. This was pretending to be that, this episode of Discovery, except the episodes they were giving you, they rejiggered what was going on. Michael Burnham in Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. In that episode, there was several time looping that was going on. In the first iteration, Stamets was trying to convince her of something weird going on, and there wasn't enough time in that first loop for her to fully grasp what he was saying, but she also wasn't rejecting it. And then starting in the second loop on, she was open-minded enough to listen to what Stamets was saying. In this Discovery episode, she was about as close-minded, I'm talking the flashback, the younger Michael Burnham. She was as close-minded as I think you could write a character. She didn't want to hear any input. And as Molly pointed out, what they're trying to say in this episode is that knowing these crew people are what gives you the advantage, to gives you a bond between them, when all they used this knowledge for, Rayner and her, was to manipulate people. There was nothing there to show like that getting to know that person meant I have faith that that person's going to make the right decision, or Tilly and I have been friends for so long. Michael Burnham was going to approach Tilly because they're supposed to be best friends, and asking Tilly to believe me, trust me, we're best friends now and we're going to be in the future. I mean, back then they weren't best friends, but they were becoming friends. They didn't do any of that. So the Michael Burnham character as played in the older version in this episode, season 5, they were purposely making her this close-minded, overly aggressive, emotional character because they wanted to show how much growth had happened between season 1 and now. Because one of our criticisms, and lots of people's criticisms, is outside of her hairstyle and her breathy acting, nothing's changed with this Michael Burnham character, and I stand by that assertion.
It kind of makes me wonder if these writers don't know the difference between friendship and manipulation. Like, if it's the same thing. Because it's weird how they seem to think that knowing someone and manipulating them like that are... They don't seem to understand that that's what they did there. That they used the knowledge to manipulate people. they were writing that as friendship. And that's just, there's something twisted with that.
Well, the ethics of these writers on this show, all 5 seasons, is disgusting. And people who follow this show, I'm going to give credit and say the people who follow this, I don't know if they're all disgusting. I just think a lot of them don't understand what they're seeing in front of them.
Yeah.
Because there is messaging going on here that I don't think they're picking up on. Because if they did, I would like to think, because I actually have faith in human beings, that if they knew the messaging going on here, that they would reject it and say, yeah, that's enough of that. I'm not watching this anymore.
I think they're trusting people who give things the kindest reading, and they don't realize they're being manipulated. And it's funny because this just seems to telegraph that these writers know exactly what they're doing, manipulating people.
Yeah, they know what they're trying to do. The thing is, they do it so ham-fisted that if you just pulled your head away from being a brand loyalist and just looked objectively at what they're doing, or as close to objectively as a human being can get, you would see that this is propaganda. This is not good entertainment. They are pushing some weird stuff, and this episode, the Michael Burnham is the greatest thing ever, is reinforcing something weird, saying a mutineer, if you work hard enough, you can become captain. And I would reject that idea. Any Navy that would have a mutineer not accused of mutiny, but then was cleared. I mean an actual mutineer. I think we all agree, even the supporters of this show, that Michael Burnham was a mutineer.
She was in prison.
Now, you might be able to redeem her to a point where maybe she could be a consultant like she was in season 1, but you would never, ever, ever have that person in any leadership position at all because they have extremely poor judgment. Human beings do not change over the course of decades. I've learned that as I've gotten older. Some of them get better at hiding and they pretend that they changed, but most human beings, their core personality traits are who they're going to be for the rest of their lives.
Again, manipulation. They learn how to manipulate you better. And the other thing about that is that it was amusing. In fact, I was laughing out loud with my jaw hanging open when Rayner was giving her that little speech at the end of this season 5 episode about she needs to trust that voice in her head. I'm like, that's how she got where she was.
All 5 of them?
That's how she was in jail for mutiny and then wound up on this ship because Lorca brought her there. It was because she was listening to that bad voice inside her head that was telling her to do bad things, like bad piano music going on in there. She shouldn't listen to that voice in her head. It's wrong.
When you look at the beginning of Michael Burnham in this Discovery show, and you see what her mistakes were in judgment that caused the Klingon War, that eventually got her to mutiny, and then eventually got her in prison, and then the stuff that spawned off from that, you can't build a house on a crappy foundation. Because when we get to the end of this video, because I don't want to spend too much time on this right now, but I'm going to dig in more into exactly what Michael Burnham's fatal flaw is, her foundation problem, and how no matter how much they try to rewrite it, they're not going to fix it doing what they're doing. But I'm going to save that till the very end. But even in the end scene, or the end ready room scene with Rayner and Michael Burnham, and Rayner was giving credit to Michael Burnham's leadership style as far as forming connections can help a crew be a useful, cohesive unit, or whatever the crap she was saying. And she was willing to admit that, yes, familiarity can lead to complacency. But she said that this smirky way. She wouldn't even say something like, and you know, I learned something from you, Rayner, that maybe we are too familiar sometimes, and maybe that does cause us to basically smell our own farts and think we're the best of the best. They already ruined that Rayner character that entire episode, so that wouldn't have actually fixed anything. But at least that ending scene would have showed they were trying to fix Michael Burnham in some way. Because when they basically at the end there said Michael Burnham was right, she was proven right, Michael Burnham's always been right, Even when you think you saw something in a previous season that was wrong, no, Michael Burnham was actually right. You just didn't see it right.
And then at the end of that episode, when they're sitting there and the crew is saying, oh, I can't believe that I actually believed you. And it's like, why are you talking about this? Mal and Locke have a 6-hour head start on you. Shouldn't you be, I don't know, trying to find them? But instead they were having that conversation like they were just a group of people out having a beer and a pizza. Again, jaw on the floor moment.
Well, even in that last time jump, when Michael Burnham was trying to convince Ariam that she was future Michael Burnham, and that guy who pulled a phaser on Michael Burnham to get her to stop talking to Ariam, he was going to shoot her for the crime of talking.
Yep.
He was going to cancel her.
It was the ultimate cancel.
Because she was talking to Ariam.
She was saying things he didn't like. So he was going to shoot her.
Like, the messaging in this episode, as I said at the beginning, that 20 minutes when they were trying to figure out the time jumps and what was going on, I'm not going to go as far to say I was enjoying it, but I was going along with it. It didn't really, there wasn't any sort of that Discovery level. You mentioned you get migraines from flashes. When I watch Discovery, I get like bad cramps and diarrhea, but I wasn't getting any of those cramps watching it, so it was going okay. Up until, as you pointed out, they got to the bridge of one of the jumps. I think if she put her hand on the chair or something and said something like, I never thought I was going to be in this chair. And then from that point on, when Rayner started kissing her ass, you were destined to be this. He said pretty much that. And then all the other jumps were supporting that. And even at the very end, when Michael Burnham had the phaser, young Michael Burnham from season 1, had the phaser on Rayner, and Rayner, the way he talked her down wasn't through logic and facts about convincing her that he's from the future and any of that. What he had to do was explain to her how great she's going to be. So, of course, Michael Burnham would be like, well, wait a minute. You're saying I'm great and I'm going to be even greater? Yeah, I'll put my phaser down. That's some good logic you're using there. And you think I'm making this up to make a joke? That's actually what happened in the episode. She was convinced that they were from the future because she was told how great she is currently and how greater she's going to be in the future.
I did want to say that whatever de-aging they did on the Michael Burnham character, I don't know, maybe it was just her trying to play her younger self, but they made her look kind of like some sort of animal. I mean, like she seemed almost feral compared to the young Michael Burnham that we saw in the season 1 episode. It was really weird.
I think it was the facial expressions.
Was it?
Because it reminded me, if you remember the TOS Mirror Mirror episode, when they actually showed the proper universe and they showed the mirror counterparts, they were all like growling and they curled up their faces and stuff. That's how Michael Burnham looked in Discovery, the younger Michael Burnham. Again, trying to simulate the growth that the show wants to show everybody. It's almost like the show was asked after school to talk to the teacher, and the teacher said, I didn't think you did your book report here. It doesn't look like you did what I asked you to do. And so what they ended up doing was changing the rules of what they did to try to prove they did do the book report. Because Michael Burnham, when you look past her hair and her uniform and her breathy acting, the character, and again, I know you guys get sometimes sick of us saying this, but last season, when Book asked, how is this any different than when you were dealing with the Klingons? And Michael Burnham said, 1, 2, 3. She had an intrinsic understanding of Klingon culture when she did not. Hence why she made all these mistakes, because she was dealing with PTSD. And that showed, at least as of last season, that she didn't grow. And what they tried to do here was despicable. That's why I was talking to Molly this morning. I said, I can't put this worse than torturing a tardigrade or that grape scene that they had with Ash, that flashback, or when they were going to blow up the Klingon homeworld, or they cloned a baby to hold up a dead baby head. But this is the next level below that as far as you sneaky, sneaky people trying to pull this out, trying to make it seem like it's a Rayner development episode, when all this was to try to fix the criticisms of Michael Burnham. Instead of doing the work to actually redeem the character, you were just going to have a flashback episode to show she was redeemed all along. What are you talking about? Because Molly and I, the way we go about when we review stuff, and you have probably figured this out, listener, is we come at this from like a humanistic point of view, a morality point of view, a cause and effect point of view when it comes to the logic in the episode. We're not so much based on the technology. I mean, yes, last week we did make fun of the magic technology, but we don't usually have videos where we get into the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts of Star Trek technology, because that's not really where we're interested in. We are interested in watching television and movies for ethics, morality, relationships in a positive way. That's what we watch this stuff for. So that's why our takes come from that direction. That's why when we go after the Michael Burnham character, it's because from that angle, she is a horrible character that has sank this show. And I'm not talking Sonequa Martin Green, the actress. The actress can only do what lines she is given. These are the executive producers and the writers of this series that have made the Michael Burnham character so unlikable and such a critically flawed character that you can't do anything with this character. What they're trying to do is so laughably bad. It's almost funny what they tried to do in this episode. It's like a kid whose arm is stuck in the cookie jar lying to you. That's what they're doing here. And Molly and I both looked at the TV. We paused it a few times and said, what? What did they just do there?
And I will say that, like you just said, the premise of this whole show was doomed from the very beginning, because they set her up as a mutineer and a war criminal. In order to properly rehabilitate this character, it would have taken a lot of work. A lot that clearly they weren't going to be capable of doing anyway. But the point is that nobody wanted to sit there and watch episode after episode after episode of this character coming to grips with what she had done and paying her penance. Nobody wanted to watch that, because how interesting would that have been? I mean, I've complained before that Star Trek is no longer about going out and exploring, seeking out new life. It's not. This is all about the feelings and, I guess, personal growth, or lack thereof, of the characters on this ship.
To try to look at the kindest interpretation possible, Michael Burnham was suffering of severe PTSD, because in season 1, you found out that the reason she had this repulsion to Klingons was that her family was killed by Klingons while she was hiding in a cabinet, like looking at it happening. So if they would have went about this from a PTSD healing place, this might have been an interesting character study of somebody who's overcoming something like that to try to be a functioning person in society. But when they're not even admitting, I mean, they did in this episode, Rayner brought up something like, well, my parents died young too. Like, there was some throwaway exchange that was trying to simulate that we're giving lip service to the PTSD she was under. But they didn't do anything to explore that. I mean, it would have been interesting to me if maybe they would have explored Michael Burnham realizing why she made those bad decisions. That she had such trauma from what happened to her as a child, watching her parents be murdered like that. I mean, it turns out her mom was actually still alive, but at the time she thought both died. That her realizing about what happened, and then her healing, and then forming connections with people outside of Vulcans, non-Vulcan people with emotions, so that she could work through this. That to me might have been interesting, and Kurtzman and Paradise will probably say that's exactly what they did, but they did not. They gave lip service to that.
I think there is also something more insidious about this, in that throwaway line where Rayner basically said that he lost his family young too, and all the other things that he said throughout this episode that tried to make it sound like he and Michael Burnham are extremely similar characters. I think that the insidious thing about that is that this is going to be used as a weapon against fans who like the Rayner character, but still reject the Michael Burnham character.
It's like an aha moment.
Yeah, they're trying to pretend like these two characters are equal, when they are not. He is not a war criminal. He is not a mutineer. Even in that episode with that avalanche, he was told this was a red directive. Any means necessary. So he was following orders. So you cannot, by any stretch, tell me that he and Michael Burnham are the same, because they are not.
I don't even know why he was encouraged to retire. He was given a red directive, and although we don't know exactly what that means, the guy with the glasses made it seem like it was an any means necessary type situation.
That's what they said.
And he still used some caution, but he was doing any means necessary to try to stop those two, because those were the orders he was given. So I don't even understand why he was forced to retire. He was just doing what they told him to do in this extreme circumstance of a red directive.
Because again, there would have been a more interesting conversation to have about sacrificing the lives of that village in order to stop Maul and Locke from destroying basically everything. You know, the needs of the many versus the needs of the few.
And leadership, and how military leaders have to make those decisions every single day.
Yeah.
And those are hard decisions. Yeah, I agree with you. That would have been a very interesting discussion, but we're dealing with this show that's usually geared for 8 to 15-year-olds. And of course, this episode, like I said, it's like 8 to 5. Like 5-year-old to 8-year-olds is what this episode was geared for. So they could never cover that in this episode. But like the whole series, they could have done that.
And again, this goes back to, we've seen similar situations in other shows and films, and they explored the moral implications better than this. This, instead of exploring any of that, all they did was boil it down to, oh, you gotta make friends and connections so that you can work together better. And again, that sounds like that same crap that you'd get in corporate America, where you have these team building exercises, which ironically are usually very ableist. Because there's oftentimes some sort of, here, fall backwards and your coworkers will catch you kind of crap. Again, it's this cult-like crap. And I'm sick of it. I don't know. I guess I just finally reached the final straw, and I'm done. No more of this shit.
So the Rayner character is now 70% toast, which we knew this. I'm not blaming the actor at all. Much like Sonequa Martin Green, he can only read the lines he's given. But whatever hope I had for the Rayner character is now gone. He's now 70% a Discovery character. Give him an episode or two, he'll be completely indoctrinated into that garbage. So probably in a couple of episodes, he'll be committing war crimes too. I'll just be rolling my eyes going, of course he is.
Yeah, obviously this is nothing against the actor. Loved him on Battlestar Galactica, loved him on Due South. But this, I'm sorry he's gotten involved with this series, but again, I hate to say this, but once you're an actor of a certain age, I guess you just got to take what you can get. Now, it's unfortunate because, as I said in a comment, when this guy comes on screen, he steals the scene because he is clearly a much better actor than pretty much everybody else there.
Even when he's talking with that gruff kind of monotone thing, he has charisma.
Yeah.
Like somehow he's able to, with that gruff monotone delivery,
and those garbage lines,
he has charisma to him. They're wasting this actor.
Yeah, completely.
Okay, so before I get started here, there is going to be spoilers for the Babylon 5 franchise. So if you've not seen Babylon 5, but one day you're going to, skip to the next segment of this video. That said, I want to make sure that we're crystal clear on what Michael Burnham did wrong in Season 1. We made a video about this, a clip video, and we had a commenter asking the question of, well, what was Michael Burnham supposed to do with the torchbearer? The torchbearer lunged at her and she was defending herself, so she ended up killing him by activating the rockets and putting the thing through him. That's not starting it where you need to start her crime. Why was she there facing off against the torchbearer on that artifact? Captain Georgiou, proper Captain Georgiou, after a discussion with her, Commander Burnham, and Saru, they decided Michael Burnham was going to get into a suit, a jetpack suit, I guess, and she was going to make a flyby. In fact, Captain Georgiou made it very specific, just a flyby. And Michael Burnham returned back the order and said, just a flyby. So Michael Burnham understood the order. As she was flying out to the artifact, she went through some interference, and so the Shenzhou couldn't talk to her anymore. So Michael Burnham was acting on her own at that point with no direction from Captain Georgiou. Michael Burnham decided on her own as she was flying by that it looked so interesting, she was going to land and check it out firsthand. When she landed, it activated the artifact's defenses, and the Torchbearer came out to defend the artifact, and that's when the fight started. So her initial crime wasn't the mutiny. It wasn't killing the Torchbearer, although that was bad. The thing that started the whole war was Michael Burnham failed to follow an order, which caused her to land on that ship because she was just had to do it. Again, that voice in her head. Her orders were from Georgiou, flyby. Michael Burnham replied back, just a flyby. So Michael Burnham's voice in her head when she was out of range of communication because of the interference, that voice in her head that in this episode, Rayner said you should listen to, was the voice that told her to land on that artifact and start the whole war. After the Torchbearer got killed by Michael Burnham not following orders, this whole chain of events happened that spiraled out of control. That's what led to the mutiny. That's what led to Michael Burnham later on saying she had an intrinsic understanding of Klingon culture, which she did not, because she was still dealing with that PTSD. She had such an intrinsic understanding of Klingon culture, she had to talk to Sarek about the Klingons. So, what I'm trying to explain here is the Michael Burnham character, her initial crime was that of not following orders. If you want to call this a first contact situation, I don't remember if they met the Klingons before this. They must have, because I think this was after Enterprise, but before TOS, if I'm remembering. But it was kind of a pseudo first contact situation. Georgiou realized that Michael Burnham was not the proper person to be doing some sort of initial contact if there were entities there. That's why she only gave approval to do a flyby. Now, if you don't believe me, go watch the Vulcan Hello yourself. It's like the first 15 or 20 minutes. And you'll see what led up to that. You'll see the Torchbearer got killed because Michael Burnham landed on that thing, the artifact. The Torchbearer battle never would have happened if Michael Burnham wouldn't have landed. So that is how she started the whole Klingon War. Because, I don't know, maybe we didn't make it clear before in our previous videos where we were having conversations about this, or in that last clip video we made on this topic. But we included in that clip video, at the very beginning, Georgiou saying just the flyby, and Michael Burnham said just the flyby. And then we tried to show, because we have to go with the clips that are in the episode, Michael Burnham on her own, when she was out of communication, landed on the artifact. So what I want to get here is stating that that is Michael Burnham's fall, I guess we'll say. And she started a war that killed, I'm going to guess, millions of people. And just stating that, well, I tried really hard and I felt guilty, even though it didn't seem like you felt guilty, that's not enough. All those families of those people, they're not going to be happy with the I tried really hard and I realized that I respected Starfleet too much. Now, at the end of the first season, when she was giving that ridiculous speech, the mutineer was giving a speech after she was reinstated into Starfleet about she gave into fear, which she did. That was her PTSD speaking from when her parents died in front of her eyes as she was hiding in that cabinet. I was thinking that maybe season 2 was going to build on that to realize that Michael Burnham is a broken character, but maybe they could have developed her character in a way that never forgot what she did. They've done everything they could in this series to forget what she did. And so many people concentrate on the mutiny. And yeah, the mutiny was a big freaking deal. But her initial thing wasn't the mutiny. It was not following orders, which has been, I don't even know how to explain how distasteful I find the Michael Burnham character. Now, what I wanted to get at here, going along with this, what they were trying to do in this episode is they were trying to say, look how much Michael Burnham has changed. She's been through this transition, and look where she is now versus where she was. Before this episode, whenever critics like ourselves would bring up that Michael Burnham hasn't really done any character development, they would point out that that episode in season 3, when Michael Burnham came through that time wormhole in her Iron Man suit, the Red Angel suit, and she was there, I think, for a year before Discovery. And in season 3, episode 3, People of Earth, you got to see like this montage where she was growing her hair longer and she was started changing her speech patterns. And then later on in the episode, when she met back up with Discovery, she met up with Tilly. Michael Burnham had her new long hair and she had her breathy talking. And Tilly said something like, "You seem lighter." And people have been pointing to this to say, you don't understand, Michael Burnham went through some sort of transition. And I'm going to call this for what it is, at least for me, going through sci-fi and fantasy circles. What this is an attempt to do is, if anybody, and I'm sure everybody listening to this is going to get this, in Lord of the Rings, when Gandalf the Grey fell to the Balrog and he became Gandalf the White, this is what they're trying to do here. They're trying to say in that episode that we only got to see a compilation of, and then Michael Burnham speaking of like a few episodes after this, about how much happened since she went through the wormhole and moved forward in time. But we never got to see any of that because of the long hair. Like Gandalf the Grey got the white hair and the white robe. Michael Burnham, with her long hair and her breathy talking, somehow has transitioned.
Yeah, they rebooted her character, but they did it off screen. So they didn't actually have to show you how she became this new person. It was just, oh, I'm a new person now.
What I'm trying to say is I do not feel the Michael Burnham character has been given anything on screen to make me believe they've transitioned from an old life to a new life other than hair and a different style of acting. And to use some Star Trek references before I get into the Babylon 5 stuff I want to talk about briefly, is if we remember the episode The Doomsday Machine of TOS, and remember Commodore Decker, and remember how he made a mistake that cost his crew their lives, not that there was a good choice to make. I mean, that crew was going to be dead whether they stayed on the ship or not. But he felt so guilty about that at first, he tried to take over the Enterprise and get revenge for that machine killing his crew. But at the end, he stole a shuttlecraft and essentially killed himself to see what he could do to take out that thing. He felt so guilty about what happened. And then also in TOS, if you remember the Ultimate Computer that had M5, and that was the episode that had the computer that was being tested to take over operations of the Enterprise. The whole concept there was that machine was using a human mind as like its initial starting point. That was the big breakthrough that happened. And so the way they defeated that machine at the end to get it to shut down was they convinced it, because it was based on a man who had morality, that he cost these people all their lives, the starships that this machine was killing, and that this machine, because it was built on that human mind that was an ethical mind, it felt remorse, and it felt that it needed to have itself be killed to try to make up for all the deaths that it did. Those are two examples in Star Trek of people having true remorse for what they did. Now, I'm not saying it always has to lead to people committing suicide to make up for it, but I can also understand why that would happen, kind of like in the samurai type way where you screwed up, the best thing you can do to maintain honor is to
fall on your sword.
And Michael Burnham has never, ever taken responsibility. Now, what I wanted to talk about is going back to the PTSD stuff, because I actually think that there's ways you could tell that story that would be interesting. So I'm going to talk briefly about an episode of Babylon 5 in Season 3 called A Late Delivery from Avalon. I'm going to set up the scenario here because I know a lot of our subscribers, they don't really watch other shows but Star Trek, so I'll ramp you up with what you need to know. In Babylon 5, you have the Earth people, and they're part of the Earth Alliance. And then there are other different alien races, and this one race was called the Minbari. And it's one of the oldest races. Its technology is far advanced. Well, as the Earth people were going out exploring, they met up with a Minbari ship. And the Minbari have this tradition that, to show respect, that they would open their gun ports in order to show respect. And the captain of that ship, the Earth ship, who encountered the Minbari, the ship was called the Prometheus, but that's not important, misinterpreted that and gave the order to fire and destroyed that ship. And that is what started off the whole war. And the order he gave came down to this gunnery sergeant, who was the one who actually pushed the button that fired the weapon that blew up the ship. Now, you can kind of see where this is a little bit Michael Burnham at the beginning here. That's what happened at the beginning of the Babylon 5 mythos. So in this episode, A Late Delivery from Avalon, this gunnery sergeant appeared on Babylon 5, and he was having a mental breakdown. He thought he was King Arthur, and he was walking around looking for the Lady of the Lake. Dr. Franklin eventually was able to sit down with this man, and the episode had a lot of other stuff going on, but I'm going to keep it just to what we're talking about here. And he got the man to admit that he wasn't Arthur. He was actually this gunnery sergeant, David McIntyre. And as soon as he did that, this guy's mind shut down because he had such PTSD over what happened in that whole war. Because what happened with the war, it was actually bigger than the Michael Burnham situation because the Minbari were so technologically superior. It was like the Borg in Star Trek when the Enterprise first encountered them. I mean, they blew through the Earth defenses and they were going to completely destroy the Earth. So this guy was dealing with this guilt so badly that he created this fantasy of this Arthur legend around him. And the ending of the story was that he was carrying the sword around, the Excalibur sword, and he had to give the sword to the Minbari ambassador in order for him to remove his pain so that he could heal from what he was dealing with. Now, a lot of that episode, the beginning parts especially, before you found out what was happening, just having this King Arthur guy bouncing around the station, I mean, it was a bit cheesy and corny, but like the last 15 minutes of that episode was really good. And in the 1990s, dealing with PTSD like that, I thought was a really interesting thing to do because that was something I hadn't seen on at least U.S. television dealt like that before. And that's a very similar situation to what Michael Burnham was dealing with. The way Michael Burnham dealt with it was not to deal with it. In this episode of Season 5, when they were talking about, I just didn't feel like I could ever sit in a Starfleet chair, you should never sit in a Starfleet captain's chair. You've removed your ability to do that by your poor judgment. If you work really, really hard, you might be able to work your way back up to where people might trust you with a little bit of responsibility. But what they did is they just rebooted this character. That PTSD that she had, I guess they don't talk about it except when they need to talk about it. But when did they actually deal with it? I guess maybe when her mother came to visit, but it was done in a way where it was more about mom and her and not about her realizing, oh my God, what did I do to all those people that I killed? Because I've been waiting. This type of stuff, it's not like I'm against the concept of redemption, but I need to see that in narrative. And they've given me nothing. This episode was spitting in my face when they were making that Michael Burnham character, the younger one, the previous older seasons Michael Burnham. They were misrepresenting what that character was just so they could hold a tape measure up to that character, to current Michael Burnham, and say, see, look how much she's grown. She even looks different and she acts different. Isn't that amazing how much growth we've done in this series? Abracadabra. That's really all I wanted to say about this. I wanted to explain what Michael Burnham's problem was and how another franchise that's very similar to Star Trek, Babylon 5, took on the concept of PTSD and they showed it proper respect. Whereas this, I don't know why they're not getting more heat for trivializing PTSD in Discovery. Because I thought that they like to pride themselves on this diversity and inclusion. And I thought that something like PTSD should be given a whole episode or two to talk about. The closest we've gotten to PTSD coverage in this series was when Book lost his planet. At least that's the closest I can remember.
And even that, there was just a lot of grief involved and a lot of anger. I wouldn't even call that PTSD that he was dealing with. It was poorly executed that season. I don't know. You'd think he would still be grieving more now, but maybe that's what's to come with Mal allegedly being the only family he has left, or the closest thing to family he has left. But again, is he going to have to decide that the people on Discovery are his real family or some crap? That's all they want to talk about, is that kind of stuff. Connections, friendship, and family. That's all of this show, apparently, from the beginning has been like that.
Found family, not family, because family might be interesting. Found family is what they're interested in on this show.
Yeah, found family. You can see them setting up for that, to do that kind of thing again, already. No wonder they're not going to talk about things like PTSD or the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few. They're not going to talk about concepts like that. Sacrifice. Arse.
The lesson we learned in this episode is Michael Burnham was always great, and she will be greater as time goes on. I'm not even exaggerating. It's not a cheap shot. That's essentially what they said in this episode, is that in the past, Michael Burnham, because she was struggling with so much, she's great. And just wait till you become a captain. You'll see how greater you get. That's it. No, maybe we should be dealing with what she did. They gave lip service to it in this episode. What? Maybe a few lines of dialogue, sort of, with Michael Burnham saying, well, I'm a mutineer. I never thought that I would be sitting in that chair. Nor should you. You should not be thinking about sitting in that chair, nor should you ever sit in that chair, because your character is a damaged individual. And I'm not saying that to make fun of the character. Mental illness actually is something I treat seriously, because I've had several family members struggling with various forms of it. But it's serious. You don't sit there and screw around with the topic like that. And that's why it angers me when they do stuff like this, because I'm still waiting for them to fix the Michael Burnham character. And by fixing, for her to have the realization that she made a ton of mistakes. And her sitting in that captain's chair is an insult to everybody she cost the life of because of her judgment.
It's clear we're never going to get that. Like, ever. It's too late for it, for starters. And then what they just did with this episode, trying to rewrite history to justify the character she is now, we're never going to get a proper accounting for what she actually did.
I know it's too late, but if they just would go through this, like I said, she steps down, Rayner's set up as second in command. Michael Burnham says, you remind me of a lot of mistakes that I made, and I'm now coming to grips with why I made those mistakes. And I've got no business in that chair. My younger self was right. I never should have sat in this chair. It's an insult to all those families that died. And Michael Burnham stepping down, for me anyway, would actually make the character possibly a good character at that point. It took her forever to reach this point, but I don't think the writers understand what I'm explaining to them. They think she's already been fixed. It's good to go.
Well, and also the way that she keeps insisting, well, actually everybody in the show keeps insisting to Rayner that the burn is over. Times have changed. You have to change the way you do things. They're acting like this is peacetime now and you can be complacent. And the reality is that Progenitor's technology is actually far more dangerous than what they were dealing with during the burn. So the fact that they're being so complacent about it, I don't understand.
Michael Burnham and her 900-year-old ideas about things versus this time where Mal and Locke are living and doing their things. Which of these two captains has a better chance of outthinking where these people are going to go?
Well, we just saw a scenario where they failed to stop Malin Locke from getting the progenitors technology, and they sell it to the Breen, and the Federation is destroyed and they all die. But somehow, apparently, the tactics used during the burn, even though time was of the essence to stop them from attaining the technology, apparently that doesn't apply. It's very strange. He's supposed to start acting like Michael Burnham instead of doing what was successful during the burn.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention one more Babylon 5 thing. So, the finale of the whole series, the last segment before the credits come up, or actually during the credits, you see all the main characters, and it's a split screen, and they show the very first scene the character appeared in the series, and then they show the very last scene the character appeared in the series. Not just visually, but anybody who watched the 5 seasons of that franchise, when you look at each one, because they do the split screen and they keep each character up for like 5 seconds and they move on to the next one, you can read the whole experience like in the characters' faces at the end. And some of them are actually dead, like Marcus. They had to show a tombstone because he died. I look at that and I use Babylon 5 as an example because that was a pre-planned arc. And that ending credit scene that had the beginning and ending of the characters visually, and you could not just see the differences. Like Michael Burnham, you can put a visual, she's got longer hair and a red uniform and she looks a little bit older. That's not what I'm talking about. When I talk about the character of Michael Burnham, I don't see any growth at all. Just illusions of growth. But in those Babylon 5 different plates, I guess we'll call them, for each character, I can give you a whole background of that picture on the left where you first saw him versus the picture on the right. And I can give you a whole history of what's changed about that character. And that was 5 seasons as well. So when Discovery at the end of this season, I'm going to guess they're going to stupidly do something like that. Because why not steal from Babylon 5? Sure, why not? I'm going to guess they're going to do that. And it's going to be like, really? How have these characters changed? Sure, Ariam's dead now. But the way Marcus died, he died in a self-sacrifice way. I mean, I could go into all these characters and how it's not as simple as, oh, he's dead, Ariam's dead. It's like, no, Marcus, he sacrificed himself for somebody else, and that's how he died. And when he first joined the series and he joined the organization he joined it because his brother joined, and when his brother died, he was kind of felt guilty, so he felt he had to just pick up and do the organization, but he was kind of going through the motions. But when he died at the end, he did a sacrifice for somebody. So, like, every one of those different plates of the different characters at the end of Babylon 5, I can give you a whole story of how they've changed. Not just events, but how inside of them they changed. And when they do this to Discovery, if they decide to steal that thing from Babylon 5 at the end, I guarantee you I'm going to be on this channel and you're going to have a 2-hour video, hopefully not that long, where I'm going to pick apart what they're going to do if they're stupid enough to do something like that at the end. To try to simulate character growth when all you did was change uniforms and hairstyles.
Well, all in all, this episode,
it was bad.
Yeah.
It was bad. There was 20 minutes where if you look at a YouTube clip and find that 20 minutes, hey, it's not horrible. But after that, oh my God, all it turned into was Michael Burnham's the best. She's the best. She always was the best.
And it didn't actually advance the story for this season either.
Nope. You could have not aired this episode and it affects the narrative in no way whatsoever.
Yeah, this was a waste other than them trying to say Michael Burnham's great and Rayner gets with the program. That was it. That's all you need to get from this episode. And again, as far as advancing the narrative for the season, this does nothing to do that.
No.
You could skip this episode and go straight to the next one, assuming that the next one actually pertains to hunting down the progenitor's technology. But this makes no difference.
And they tricked you. This is a Rayner character development episode. No, it's not. It's a way to try to shut the critics up about Michael Burnham. That's what this episode's about.
Yep, exactly. If you hate yourself, or if you want to watch for the good 20 minutes, well, I wouldn't say good, the tolerable 20 minutes that existed in this episode toward the beginning, after the Mullen Locke scene up until Michael Burnham reaches for that captain's chair in the future. If you want to watch that, go right ahead. But otherwise, this episode does not advance the story. All it did was, like you said, it's just trying to advance the Michael Burnham character. They did it in sheep's clothing of trying to bring the Rayner character into the fold.
Yeah, they weren't even advancing them. Michael Burnham, we already know she's the best. This was a episode to just convince critics, no, she was the best. And then they bring up crap that's not even accurate representations. Like, people like Molly and I didn't watch Discovery, right? We're critics of this show. We don't really like this show. But to make the assumption that we didn't watch the show and that we can't go back and watch previous episodes, that is insulting. What do they think about their audience as far as intelligence level? They should not think they could get away with doing something like this. This is snake oil that they were selling. This episode should be called Snake Oil because that's what they sold about the Michael Burnham character.
Anybody else watch this monstrosity? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
Take care.